You are 3 days old. You cannot lift your own head. You cannot see past a few inches in front of your face. You cannot warm your own body. And if left on the ground for even a few hours, you will die of exposure before you die of anything else. You are, by any objective measure, the least equipped newborn on the entire planet. A baby zebra is running with the herd within an hour of birth. You cannot even roll over. And yet you have an unbroken line of ancestors going back 300,000 years, every single one of whom survived this exact stage of catastrophic helplessness. Long enough to grow up, long enough to have children of their own, over and over, generation after generation, with no exceptions. Break that chain once at any point, and you are not here. So how did they do it? Not with luck, not once, by accident. Thousands of times, on purpose, across ice ages and famines and floods, with no hospitals, no formula, no antibiotics of any kind. The answer isn't a list of quaint survival tricks. It's closer to an operating system, a set of behaviors so deeply wired into your biology that pieces of it are still running inside you right now, whether you notice or not. Start with the strangest part of the puzzle. Human birth barely makes sense on paper. A newborn horse is standing within 2 hours. A chimpanzee, your closest living relative, comes out able to grip its mother's fur and hang on immediately. A human infant does neither. You arrive nearly blind, unable to hold up your own skull, unable to survive more than a few hours without direct intervention from another person. Why would evolution design something this broken? Because of your brain. Specifically because your brain got too big for the exit. A fully brain-developed human skull simply cannot fit through a human pelvis. So evolution made a trade. It shortened pregnancy and pushed most of your brain's growth into the years after birth instead of before it. At birth, your brain is only about a quarter of its adult size. A chimpanzee is born already close to half. Scientists call this trade-off the obstetric dilemma. You were born early, on purpose, as a compromise your entire species is stuck with, which means every human who has ever lived spent their first year or two essentially finishing development out in the open, completely exposed, completely dependent. No single person can carry that job alone. So humans didn't. This is where the real story starts, and it has almost nothing to do with a mother acting by herself. Primatologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy spent decades studying exactly this problem, and her conclusion changed how anthropologists think about human origins. She argued that humans evolved as cooperative breeders, meaning raising a child was never designed as a two-person job or even a one-family job. It was built to be split across an entire group. Hrdy documented traditional societies where infants were handed between caregivers all day long, held by an aunt, nursed by a neighbor, carried by an older cousin. A single baby might pass through a dozen different arms before its first nap was even over. Why would a species evolve to want that? Because a lone mother, foraging for food while also caring and protecting a completely helpless infant, is running two impossible jobs simultaneously. Something has to give. Cooperative breeding solved it. Spread the labor and the math suddenly works. Nobody demonstrates this better than grandmothers. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes noticed something striking while studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania. Women well past their own fertile years were among the most productive food gatherers in camp, and what they gathered went straight to their grandchildren, freeing the children's mothers to rest, recover, and have more children sooner. Hawkes built an entire theory around it, now called the grandmother hypothesis. It proposes that menopause itself, a trait almost unheard of elsewhere in the animal kingdom, evolved because an older woman's labor was worth more spent raising grandchildren than risking one more pregnancy of her own. Evolution didn't retire older women. It reassigned them. The data backs this up directly. In studies of traditional populations, the presence of a living maternal grandmother measurably raises a child's odds of surviving past age 2. None of this worked without near constant physical contact either. An infant left alone isn't just uncomfortable, it's in real biological danger. It cannot warm itself. It cannot defend itself. And its cry isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a loud, deliberately hard-to-ignore alarm built to summon help fast from anyone within earshot. In societies where infants are carried through the day, rather than set down in a crib or a pen, researchers find dramatically less crying overall. By some estimates, roughly half as much. The baby isn't being dramatic, it's reacting to conditions its biology reads as dangerous. So ancient caregivers carried, almost constantly, against the hip, against the chest, wrapped in cloth or hide, the infant physically attached to another human body for nearly every waking hour. At night, that contact didn't stop either. In the overwhelming majority of documented traditional cultures, infants slept touching an adult, not in a separate room, not across the hall in a crib, against a warm, breathing body all night, every night. Anthropologist James McKenna, who has spent much of his career researching infant sleep, suggests this closeness does more than comfort a child. He proposes that a sleeping adult's own breathing and movement may help regulate a young infant's breathing during a stage when that regulation is still unreliable on its own. Feeding followed the same pattern of constant, shared support. Breastfeeding in traditional societies typically continued for 2 to 4 years, not months, and happened many times an hour, rather than on any fixed schedule. That frequency did more than provide calories. It suppressed ovulation, naturally spacing births roughly 3 to 4 years apart, giving each child a longer stretch of undivided attention before a sibling arrived. And nursing wasn't always limited to the biological mother. Evidence from cultures worldwide points to allonursing, where multiple women in a group would nurse children who weren't their own. An orphaned or sick infant wasn't automatically doomed. Someone else's milk could carry it through. Weaning brought its own workaround, one that sounds unsettling today but made complete sense at the time. Long before pureed food in jars existed, caregivers softened food the simplest way available, chewing it first, then passing it to the infant's mouth. Chimpanzees do this too, and it likely stretches far deeper into our lineage than modern humans themselves. Uncomfortable as it sounds, researchers now suspect it may have quietly transferred beneficial bacteria along with the calories, giving developing immune systems an early head start. None of this made ancient childhood safe exactly. It made it survivable, which is a different thing entirely. Best estimates suggest that in prehistoric populations, somewhere between a third and half of all children died before age 5. That number is almost impossible to sit with, but it wasn't for lack of care. It reflects a world with no germ theory, no antibiotics, no vaccines, none of the tools that have driven child mortality down by roughly 96% since the 1800s. Ancient people weren't passive about it, though. The record is full of plant-based remedies used with real, if unexplained, effectiveness. Willow bark for pain, honey on wounds, garlic against infection, discovered through generations of trial and observation, long before anyone understood microbes. And grief, when children did die, was neither hidden nor minimized. Infant burial sites have been found carefully arranged, sometimes with small offerings left beside the body. Every culture on record developed rituals around birth and early childhood, naming ceremonies, protective customs, public rites that bound a community around a new life and gave people something to hold on to when that life was lost too soon. Here's the part worth sitting with. Much of what kept ancient children alive wasn't primitive superstition waiting to be replaced by modern science. It was a dense, overlapping network of human attention that no single caregiver could ever replicate alone, and a lot of it has quietly vanished from modern life. Extended families scattered across cities and time zones instead of one shared camp. Infants soothed by bouncers and swings instead of arms. Separate nurseries instead of a warm, breathing chest to sleep against. This isn't an argument to abandon modern medicine. The collapse of child mortality over the last 2 centuries is one of the great achievements in human history. Full stop. Nobody sensible wants to go back to losing a third of all children before age 5. But it's worth noticing what else got quietly dismantled along the way as a side effect of modern life rather than a deliberate choice. The exhaustion so many parents describe today, the sense of being the only adult standing between an infant and disaster, isn't a personal failing. It's a mismatch. A brain shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of shared caregiving, dropped into a world that expects one or two adults to do it completely alone. Ancient humans never solved that problem by being tougher or more naturally maternal or more instinctive. They solved it by refusing to do it alone in the first place. You are 3 days old. You cannot lift your own head. You cannot warm your own body. But you were never meant to figure that out by yourself. Neither was anyone who came before you. That quietly is the entire answer.